There's a specific kind of dread. Dread that brings up fear and disgust. But then there's another kind that's a little bit older, and it lives in the body before it reaches your brain. You know the feeling. You've probably had it. A video that feels wrong before you understand why. A voice that's almost human, but not quite. A face that moves a half a second too slow. Static where there should be a signal. A channel that shouldn't be broadcasting. And the wrongness of it bypasses your rational mind completely. That's analog horror. I'm Tara Peralt, and you're listening to Psychology of the Strange, part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side. Let's start with the obvious question, because it's actually not as obvious as it sounds. What is analog horror? The easy answer is horror content designed to look like it came from old technology. You know, the VHS tapes, emergency broadcast systems, public access television, camcorder footage, surveillance feeds, educational films. And that answer gets you in the door. But it misses a pretty big piece. Analog horror is a subgenre of found footage that emerged primarily on YouTube in the mid to late 2010s. It uses the visual grammar of analog formats, the low-fidelity VHS grain tracking errors, the static between channels and color bleeds. It's supposed to emulate late 20th century broadcast media. The setting is typically the 1960s through the 1990s, and that aesthetic is deliberately and carefully specific to that era. But the distinction that matters, found footage puts you in proximity to characters experiencing something terrible. Analog horror eliminates the characters entirely. Researcher Jordan Mason puts it plainly. In analog horror, you aren't merely witnessing characters dealing with things. You become the target. The viewer is placed in direct and unbuffered encounters with whatever is wrong in the signal. There's no protagonist to follow. There's no point of view to borrow. Just the footage and you. The genre's founding text, its proverbial first entry, if you will, is Local 58, and this was created by Chris Straub on October 26, 2015. Straub uploaded a video called Weather Service to YouTube. 2 minutes and 33 seconds of what appeared to be late-night cable television on a local station, interrupted by an emergency broadcast, warning viewers about a dangerous meteorological event not to be seen with the naked eye. The warning is in effect until sunrise. Then the broadcast gets hijacked. A second voice claims the danger is over, urges viewers to go outside. The original signal fights back, frantically warning viewers not to look at the moon. The hijacker wins. The video ends with a string of messages from the sounds like a possessed speaker. The moon came in, I drown in him. There were no monsters or reveal even. There was no explanation. It was just the corrupted signal and the creeping uncertainty that something in the world had changed. Local 58 established what can be described as the baseline formula for everything that followed. the short videos and storylines that filter into a larger conspiracy. It's supposed to have this unnerving rhetoric and voiceovers and on-screen text that creates a sense of coming danger that you can't turn away from. It also creates the central trope of the genre, the alien, the unknown, or the incomprehensible that's weaponizing human curiosity and turning us into puppets of the programming. From there, the genre expanded. Gemini Home Entertainment by Remy Abodi pushed the aesthetic towards intentional VHS creation. Each video was made with this informational purpose. It was formatted like old library tapes meant for elementary school screenings. It depicted a world in which humans were trying to function and understand their surroundings in the face of something that's quietly ending everything. Then there's the Mandela Catalog by Alex Kister that took religion, but it distorted it. Abrahamic imagery corrupted into body horror. The archangels were reconstituted as something that was deeply, deeply wrong. Be not afraid, becoming the most terrifying phrase in the genre's vocabulary. Each series had its own mythology. All of them were weaponizing the same fundamental psychological mechanisms. One of those mechanisms is predictive processing theory. And the basic idea is your brain generates these constant models of what the world should look like, and then updates those models when reality doesn't match. Most of the time, it works pretty seamlessly. You hear a sound, and your brain confirms what it is, and you move on. When the world starts to depart from that model, when something doesn't match, all of a sudden, your brain sends out this loud signal, and that signal is threat detection. It is ancient and pre-verbal. It's pre-rational. It fires before you've formed a conscious thought about what you're looking at. And analog horror is engineered to trigger that signal constantly and very specifically. So think about what happens physiologically when you're watching a well-constructed piece. So first, your visual cortex receives the cues for old video. The low resolution, the grain, the color bleed, the horizontal tracking lines. And your threat detection system should be relatively low. Archival footage is safe. Documentation is safe. And typically, authoritative formats are at least somewhat trustworthy. Then something in the footage doesn't track. The face is wrong, a figure between frames, or maybe it's just an audio glitch that resolves into language. The prediction fails, and that mismatch signal fires. Because the context gave you no reason to expect a threat, the mismatch hits harder. The threat detection system doesn't say something is wrong here. It says my entire model of this environment was wrong. This is fundamentally different and more destabilizing experience than watching a monster jump out of a closet. A monster in the closet is threatening. A world in which the closet was never what it was understood to be, that becomes existentially threatening. The genre has figured out the distinction between identifiable fear and ambient wrongness, and it's chosen ambient wrongness every time. Writer Cameline Felt frames it this way. The deliberate ambiguity and invisibility of the threat is the most intense source of tension in analog horror. The viewer's own mind supplies the missing information. The horror isn't delivered, it's cultivated. So now I'm going to ask you, what do you know about the uncanny valley? Most people instantly have some recognition of that term. It was first coined in 1970 by a Japanese roboticist, Masahiro Mori, who observed that as robots became more human-like, people found them increasingly appealing, up to a point. Past that threshold, before convincing human replication, affinity dropped sharply into revulsion. The closer something was to human without being human, the more disturbing it became. Mori called this drop Bukimi no Tani, the uncanny valley. The effect shows up in CGI that doesn't render right, or prosthetic faces, and even in certain AI-generated imagery. The leading evolutionary explanation is distinguishing accurately between humans and near humans would have been survival critical. A face that doesn't respond correctly might signal a threat. Your nervous system flags that discrepancy because historically that discrepancy mattered. Analog horror lives in the uncanny valley, and it extends that territory considerably. The genre has discovered that the format itself can go uncanny. A public safety announcement that gives wrong information, or an emergency broadcast describing something that has no protocol. Even a children's educational program that instructs children in doing something that's wrong or maybe just strange. This is what you might call the institutional uncanny valley. It's content carrying all the markers of trustworthy authority, but using those markers to transmit something that's threatening. And that's particularly potent because we've spent our entire lives learning to relax in the presence of certain formats. We're conditioned to associate the visual grammar of official broadcasting with safety or information, or maybe even some kind of reassurance that someone responsible has things handled. Local 58's contingency is the clearest demonstration of this. A government PSA formatted exactly like a Cold War civil defense broadcast, instructing citizens to kill themselves before Soviet occupation can occur. The distorted version of America the Beautiful droning underneath. The text telling parents to take care of their children first. The mechanism is official and recognizable in every detail, but the content is clearly horror. When that format becomes the delivery vehicle for something terrible, it doesn't just scare you in the moment, it can retroactively corrupt your sense of safety in similar real contexts. It teaches your nervous system to look for wrongness in places it used to feel secure. And that shift can last a while. The genre reaches past the viewing experience and into the category of experience it's borrowed from. Analog horror almost always takes place in what theorists call liminal spaces. Liminality comes from the Latin word limen, or threshold, the in-between, the transitional. So this could be hotel corridors at 3 a.m., or empty swimming pools, or office buildings after hours. You know, the back rooms. So these spaces show up constantly in the genre for a very specific reason. We are social creatures who calibrate safety through the presence of other people. An environment designed for presence but containing no people creates a particular kind of threat signal. It's a low, persistent hum of an expectation left unfulfilled. So when you ask, where did everyone go, and no answer arrives, it begins generating possibilities. And it can be catastrophizing. Under normal circumstances, you'd look around and find a reasonable explanation and move on. But in analog horror, the explanation is removed and there's no resolution. It's like a corridor that just keeps going and going, or fluorescent lights that just keep flickering. The questions expand. Serdula describes it as horror through the waiting game. The genre forces you to look, to become uncomfortable with the words glaring at you, the eyes staring at you, and the smiles that grow wider and wider and wider with each passing second. That dread accumulates rather than confronts. A jump scare provokes a sharp, sympathetic nervous system response. There's an adrenaline spike, rapid heartbeat, identification of the threat, and resolution. The body comes back down. Liminal dread persists. It runs on this low-grade anxiety that the body can't fully metabolize because the threat never becomes concrete enough to address. So it's this chronic, objectless, unresolvable environment. Analog horror has found a way to manufacture that experience aesthetically, and the manufactured version taxes the nervous system in ways that outlast the viewing. So most of us know going into analog horror content that it's fiction. The channels are clearly labeled, the creator gives interviews, the lore gets discussed openly in the comments section. There's no genuine epistemic confusion about what we're watching, and the dread still lands. And this happens because your threat detection system and your conscious rational mind are running on different tracks, and they don't wait for each other. The longer explanation involves the authority heuristic. This is the tendency to extend credibility to information delivered in authoritative-seeming formats. We learn early in life that certain kinds of presentations carry certain kinds of information. Official documents look a particular way. News broadcasts have a specific cadence. Emergency alerts carry a distinct visual and auditory grammar. Because these formats have historically been associated with reliable and important information, we've learned to attend to them below the level of conscious thought. Analog horror borrows that credibility. It performs authority spoofing, by replicating the format to bypass the critical filters that would otherwise engage. So the unsettling thing, which the research on advertising and propaganda has established pretty thoroughly, is that this works even when you know it's happening. You can know something is an ad and still want the product. You can know an emergency broadcast is fiction and still feel the spike of alarm when the tones play. Film Quarterly describes analog horror's characteristics tone as dark or uncanny nostalgia, the format doing the effective work before the conscious analysis arrives. The genre exploits the gap between intellectual knowledge and physiological response, and it does so with a precision that functions regardless of how much the viewer understands about the mechanism. The choice of old technology isn't arbitrary, and it goes deeper than low-budget practicality. So VHS footage and that public access television, all of that visual grammar of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, these formats are nostalgic for a substantial portion of the analog horror audience. They carry the emotional weight of a specific kind of remembered past, a world that felt more legible, even if it wasn't. Nostalgia is a bittersweet structure. And the literature is pretty consistent that nostalgia involves longing for something irrecoverable. An awareness of loss is embedded in the pleasure of remembering. It's the emotional experience of knowing that it will never happen again. Analog horror transforms nostalgia into anxiety, turning recollections of the past into something untrustworthy. The most reliable signals, television authority, visual grammar of childhood media, become these vectors for something that's wrong. When the genre corrupts that nostalgic frame, it retroactively contaminates the safety of memories. The children's educational program that turns disturbing doesn't just disturb you in the moment, it gestures towards every children's educational program you ever watched. The horror doesn't corrupt one piece of content. It casts a retrospective shadow across a whole category of experiences. In the Mandela catalog, this is pretty explicit with the religious imagery. So Alex Krister takes the visual vocabulary of the beginner's Bible, this content that was literally designed to be safe, instructive, and formative, and it corrupts it until the archangels become these body snatchers, and the phrase, "be not afraid," becomes the most destabilizing line in the genre. The horror reaches backward into the original content, into the memory of what imagery meant, at least before Kister got to it. And that's horror operating on memory rather than anticipation. And memory horror doesn't end when the video does. So, what does analog horror tell us about ourselves? There's a few things. First, it tells us that dread is architectural. The genre has demonstrated across hundreds of independent productions and millions of viewers that profound psychological horror is achievable without ever showing a monster, without ever committing to an explicit threat. The erosion of certainty, managed carefully and patiently, is sufficient. Second, it tells us that our trust in institutional formats is pretty specific, and it runs fairly deep. We've learned to relax in the presence of certain kinds of authority, and that relaxation allows efficient information processing. But it also operates below our conscious awareness, which means it can be exploited, even by people who understand that they're being exploited. And that format does the work, and the work gets done. And the genre is doing something more than just horror. When I was doing some research for this episode and watching tons of different analog horrors, I noticed something. There were always people in the comments section asking, is this real? Especially in some of the ones that it was kind of hard to tell the boundary if you didn't know you were looking at analog horror. And these people asking, is this real? They're demonstrating a calibrated epistemic response to an information environment that has genuinely earned suspicion. The government has been releasing documents formally acknowledging UAP phenomena and these encounters that they spent decades denying. There's the Epstein files that have revealed the scope of an institutional cover-up that would have sounded paranoid if you described it in detail 5 or 10 years ago. And all this AI-generated video now that exists at a level of quality where it's not always clear that it's AI, and it's become a specialized skill that most people don't have. The analog horror comment section is a seismograph. The question, is this real, was always the right question. The genre was designed to ask it. But now the information environment around the genre is asking back, without the controlled dose part, without the labeling, without the creator who can be found in an interview confirming that the fiction is fiction. I mean, true stories right now have been bordering on analog horror. So asking the question, is this real, makes sense for some of these analog horrors. Every era's horror tells you what the era is afraid of, and what analog horror has figured out, maybe accidentally, maybe intuitively, is something that takes the nervous system longer to learn. The most enduring fear lives in the familiar, in the format that was supposed to protect you, in the broadcast that was supposed to tell you where the danger is. A killer in the dark is terrifying, but you can run from it. A monster in the signal in the children's program, or the emergency broadcast in the government PSA, that one goes home with you. That one makes you wonder quietly what else you've been watching and not seeing correctly. The genre leaves you there, in the gap, in the static between the signal and the answer. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode, and you can find me on social media at PsychStrangePod, and I've also started a Substack that goes along with these episodes. Find the link in the show notes, and until next time, stay curious and stay strange.